The Prime Minister is either a supreme optimist or a deluded, damaged leader post his near-death experience mishandling our country after the worst terrorist attack on Australian soil at Bondi just over a month ago. It's impossible to unsee those pictures of the Prime Minister turning up the day after the shootings that claimed 15 lives, Jewish lives, on his own, gripping a cheapy bunch of flowers, or to unhear, if that's even a word, the boos that greeted him, the jeers that greeted him at that Bondi memorial. If he thinks 4 or so weeks on that a national day of mourning that he announced today for an obscure day in the middle of next week, or what will now be a heavily scrutinised hate law bill and guns bill, will cause people to somehow forget a month of weakness, well, I'm sorry, Prime Minister, you are delusional. Here was today's announcement about the day of mourning.
This will have a theme of light will win, a gathering of unity and remembrance, which has been determined by the rabbi. He has shown extraordinary leadership for someone who has lost family members in that community.
I'm sure he's genuine, but is he inspirational? No, he's not. You watch Prime Minister now, and for me, it just signals I'm watching a weak man. I hate to say it. Once the mob, as Paul Keating liked to call voters, the electorate, wakes up to your character flaws, you are in big trouble. I couldn't count the number of people who came up to me over summer and asked me what was going on with our Prime Minister. They were asking questions about leadership. He was, I said, rattled by the reception he got at the Bondi memorial service. His ego was completely fractured. His confidence was gone. And that's why we see this week his attempt to recover. Yesterday, it was the recall of Parliament and this so-called hate speech bill that a day later is seen to be full of holes.
The motion will unequivocally condemn the terrorist atrocity perpetrated at Bondi Beach and commit our Parliament to eradicating the evil of anti-Semitism. And I'm hopeful that it can deliver a powerful statement by all members and senators voting for the condolence motion.
Look, the problem for the Prime Minister here is obvious. The decision to jam together hate speech and gun buyback schemes on one piece of legislation has it set up to fail. I'm sure he doesn't want it to, but it probably will. Here was the former Deputy Prime Minister and Nationals MP Michael McCormack on this program talking about the gun issue last night.
Coalition hasn't as yet seen, as I understand, the legislation. We don't know how many pages it is. And to pack both the anti-Semitism hate speech laws and the gun buyback laws into one bill, they need to be separated. They're two totally different issues.
McCormack's right. Any fool could see that this will not pass muster with the Nats. And yesterday in the Northern Territory, their Chief Minister, Leah Finocchiaro, told Matt Cunningham from Sky that her government would not support limits on gun ownership.
We've seen New South Wales pull ahead and do their own gun reform already, and we deeply respect that, Matt, but I've been very clear the Territory has different considerations and different circumstances.
Then you have the get out of jail free card, as someone has put it, of exempting views expressed when they are quoted direct from a religious text for the purpose of teaching or discussion. And you don't need, according to the Australian newspaper today, and I'm quoting them, unnamed coalition sources, you don't need to be an expert on the Quran to work out how that's going to go. Of course, the government in the lower house doesn't need coalition support for the bill, but how will that look when this is supposed to all be about restoring social cohesion in Australia, which was a key plank of the Bondi Royal Commission? But when you get to the Senate, look, this is going to be even worse. Will the Greens pass it through? What about One Nation? The 2 days next week will have a massive role to play around whether I think the weakened leader of Anthony Albanese, already on the nose publicly, can actually survive within Labor until the next election. And on top of that, the PM pops out this morning with another unpopular member of his ministerial team, Penny Wong, and the pair would have us believe, laughingly, that Dr. Kevin Rudd has chosen to quit as US ambassador to the US a year early on his terms. Now, anyone with any examination of Kevin Rudd's ego would find that very hard to believe. But here was the Prime Minister answering a question from Sky's Cam Redden.
Was this entirely Kevin Rudd's decision to go?
Yes, it was entirely Kevin Rudd's decision.
Look, I'm pleased Kevin Rudd's getting out a year into his team. Now, I wrote this paragraph at the end of my weekly Herald Sun column a year into his ambassadorial job. I said at the end of that article, good luck, Prime Minister, you have installed a ticking time bomb in the Cleveland Avenue Embassy in Washington. That was after, of course, UK Reform leader Nigel Farage asked Donald Trump if he knew what Rudd had been saying about him. 2 years on from that column, we then had this delicious exchange during a meeting between the Prime Minister and President Trump, prompted by a question from our very own Andrew Clennell.
Taken 9 months to get this meeting. Have you had any concerns with this administration, with its stance on Palestine, climate change, or even things the ambassador said about you in the past, the Australian ambassador?
I don't know anything about him. I mean, if he said bad, then maybe he'll like to apologize. I really don't know. Did an ambassador say something bad about him? Don't tell me. I don't. Where is he? Is he still working for you?
Yeah.
You said bad?
No, before I took this position, Mr. President.
I don't like you either. I don't, and I probably never will. Go ahead.
That was the political question of the year, in my view, from Andrew Clennell there. And look at Prime Minister Albanese. I mean, sitting there laughing as the leader of the free world, Donald Trump, belittles his own ambassador right there in front of him. Now, just a couple of months later, we are now to believe, apparently, that Kevin Rudd decided that he'd had enough. He won't be missed, in my view.
Joining me now to discuss this and more is One Nation MP Barnaby Joyce. Barnaby, great to see you. First of all, your reaction to Kevin Rudd's resignation as ambassador, and who do you think should be in the role next?
Well, it was his decision, wasn't it? It was like the person who fell out of the plane. They said it was entirely his decision to pull the parachute. Well, of course, the other alternative was to bounce on the ground. Look, I don't mind Kevin, but this was a ridiculous position. It was untenable, and he should never have been put in that position, and he should have been taken out of that position ages ago. So you just can't get away with saying that. You've got to realise, you think the resources of Australia are strong. The resources around the President of the United States are immense, and they would have all the briefings in the world. Say, guess what this clown said about you, President? And he would know. He wouldn't have gone into that meeting, into that press conferences, not knowing exactly what Trump had said. And the president, gave him the greatest humiliation you possibly could in front of the world's media. And you can do that when you're the president of the United States. And we have to realise he is the president of the United States. And without the president of the United States, we don't have a defence policy. And we're in a world of trouble with the ascendancy of a totalitarian regime in China. So this had to happen now with Stephen, who's another guy I actually get along very well with. I like Stephen. But I thought he was off the hook by saying his approach was moronically stupid. You could sort of maybe have some latitude there, but then he followed it up with saying, here's the foreign policy of a moron. So, no, Stephen is going to be in the... Don't do it. Don't replace him with Stephen. Stephen's a lovely guy, but it's not going to work there either. So Joel's looking pretty good. I'd say Joel is looking pretty good. And Joel's a very, very safe set of hands. And, his son, who was tragically killed in the military, he's got all the credentials of a person, former defence minister. If I was going to the Melbourne Cup field, I'd have a pineapple on Joel to get the job.
Yeah, look, I think that's a very safe bet. And I like Stephen Conroy too as a colleague, and I've enjoyed many debates with him, especially on Paul Murray's program. But having made the comments he did, I think it would be equally untenable to have him in that position. I agree. Look, let's talk about Prime Minister Anthony Albanese yesterday, who announced he was recalling Parliament early to look at new hate speech laws on the ground of race. But the coalition has raised concerns that religious carve-outs could give licence to radical preachers to use interpretations of the Quran and other Islamic texts to espouse hatred of Jews. And in fact, this is exactly what the Sydney hate preacher Wissam Haddad tried to do in his defence to a federal court case brought by the Jewish community last year, which did fail. But Barnaby, what do you think of these new reforms, and do you share these concerns about these carve-outs?
I have concerns that we have brought into that things that are incredibly have great issue in the country, such as firearms legislation's for us. We live here, not in Bondi. We're law-abiding farmers. We haven't done anything wrong. And I don't think they'll tolerate us if we started voting for greater regulations on how people live out here. And I think it's very mischievous to put that into the same piece of legislation where there obviously will be a wealth of things we want to support. But you can't support it if you go back home and people say, you've just voted for me to have to hand over my grandparents' firearms, or you've just voted for me to no longer be able to put a foot on the nation. You asked me to love this nation, but now I'm not allowed to put a foot on it because I used to go out pig shooting and now I'm not allowed to do it anymore. Apparently it's illegal. So you want me to love this nation, you want me to defend this nation, but you have taken away the mechanism for me to recreate on this nation, and I don't quite work that out, and I can't work that out either. So, we know what the thing is. Like, Wassam Haddad, we all know his name. It's so bizarre. We all know his name.
I know. Yeah, sadly, he's infamous now.
We're not allowed to do anything about it. I mean, do you think if he was in Saudi Arabia, let's go to an Islamic country, how long do you reckon he'd last? He'd be gone. He'd be absolutely gone. And, we're playing this stupid game. We know it's in the southwest suburbs of Sydney and in sections of Melbourne. We know it's Islamic hate. We know it's fundamentalist Islam. We know who these people are. We know where it is. Yet we play this stupid game of finding all these other distractions. It's farmers. It's pig shooters. It's, militant Anglicans, and it's Islam. It's BS. That's the problem with this. We're still just dancing around the issue when we know exactly what the problem is. When I can walk into the Katingal Hotel and they'll tell me exactly what the problem is. But then we hear this sort of confetti of confusion coming out of Canberra about how they're going to deal with this issue.
Yeah, and it's not just the guns that are the distraction. I mean, I think announcing that they're going to try and ban groups like Hizb ut-Tahrir, good, should have happened a long time ago, but at the same time they have to mention the neo-Nazis, which I, of all people, will say horrendous. They shouldn't be here. We shouldn't have them, but they weren't responsible for what happened at Bondi, so it just seems like another distraction. Yes. Barnaby, yet another poll, this one by Demos AU, shows your new party, One Nation, closing in on the coalition. They're now tied on a 23% primary vote, while Labor's vote has fallen to 29%. I mean, I imagine this would be validation for you and your decision to defect late last year.
Well, people talk about me, and it's not about me. What this is about overwhelmingly is the Australian people making a change in how they vote. I might have changed parties, but the Australian people have made the biggest change, vastly bigger than me, that they want the confetti of confusion removed. They want a more stringent and clear message about issues and things. I'll give you two. One Nation's been talking forever about Islamic fundamentalism and how dangerous it is, and people know about that and they understand that. Other people might try and morph and change and twist now, but One Nation was clear about it. One Nation has been very clear about intermittent power and the absolute swindle, which is the wind turbines and the solar panels, when the cheapest form of power is coal-fired power. And people in other parties, they go, if you say coal-fired power, they go, no, you can't say that because we've got to keep teal seats, and people are over that. They say, mate, I just want cheap power. I'm dealing with the cost of living crisis. I want you to deal straight with me. And One Nation is able to do that. And, and this idea, this sort of conceit, well, it's not sort of, it's exactly conceit. You'll just be a protest party and a minor vote. I bet you they've got a different attitude when they need preferences. And by the way, that's not your decision to make. This is Australian people's decision to make as to who's minor parties and who's major parties and who is going to be the government. And when you just say, I'm entitled to this and you're not allowed to have any of my, honey smacks, well, the Australian people, I know Australia pretty well, they'll call you for it. They'll go, no, mate, that's my decision. And, maybe it's you that's going to have to try and work out whether your next job's stacking shelves at Bunnings. Because it's actually my job to determine whether that's the case.
Yeah.
So there wasn't great success that everyone heralds out of Kevin Rudd in the United States. And the fact is that Anthony Albanese needs to be a lot more careful. And even his own language. I mean, he's on the record, public record, which has set our relationship back with the United States. It's the first rule of politics. You don't make commentary about other world leaders or potential leaders, particularly in democratic nations in which you have close relationships with.
But presumably there are lots of ministers from both sides of the aisle, David, that would have historical comments that could be dubious.
Well, that's why we need to be careful in who we pick. But there's plenty of great Australians that could represent ourselves, not just in politics, outside it, and in the diplomatic corps. The reality is that we should cast the net widely, and who will not only continue to enrich our relationship with the United States with President Trump, but also a future administration, whether that be Republican or Democratic. And that's why we need to make sure there is a vast, there's 28 million of us. I'm sure we can find someone in there that can tick that box.
Yeah, look, fair enough. Let's turn to events back home as we continue to watch Air Force One just pull to a stop. We will, of course, go to the US President if he says something of significance. But we're 1 month on exactly from the Bondi Beach tragedy. Do you think we are on track to make sure something like that never happens in this country again?
Well, not unless we face up to the real core problem, and we've had a lot of diversions from Anthony Albanese. It's extreme Islamic ideology that has caused this, and it's been allowed to fester. And we saw it on the 8th of October 2023 on the steps of the Sydney Opera House. It started there, and the warning signs continued. It continued on the streets of Sydney and Melbourne in particular. We saw fire bombings of houses and cars, and then a synagogue where people were praying to what we saw a month ago, and then continued to see about a week later a rabbi's car being destroyed celebrating Hanukkah. I mean, this extreme Islamic ideology has been allowed to creep in and fester because it's been unchecked by an Albanese government that hasn't taken it seriously. And this is the reality. That's what we need to face into, is to cut that out, and we need to cut those people out that perpetrate that hate by either isolating them from society if they're Australian citizens, but if they're not Australian citizens, we need to send them away, send them back to the country they came, and we need to tighten up our immigration laws. We've got mass migration into this country without the proper checks, and reality is we're not, as their own anti-Semitic special envoy said in her recommendation, we need to increase our screening on extremist views of people coming to this country, not just for anti-Semitism, but for all extreme views. And that's what hasn't happened. That's a recommendation the government's had for over 6 months and done nothing with it. That's the problem that we found ourselves in as a society, and a society that is quickly and fastly becoming broken unless we have the courage to look ourselves in the eye and look at the real problem, not diversions.
OK, David Littleproud, we'll leave it there for now. That's the National...
Well, for more, joining us live is One Nation leader, Senator Pauline Hanson. Senator, thank you so much for joining us. Let's stay on those gun laws across the nation. We've got state laws, gun laws for federal implementations. We're seeing the Prime Minister wanting to go back to Parliament early. We're not seeing a huge population of the Nationals wanting these gun laws. What's your reaction?
I don't want the gun laws either, Janie. We've got the toughest gun laws in the world, and I totally agree with the Chief Minister of the Northern Territory. She's looking out for her constituency, Northern Territory, which is right, what she's doing, but and not to be involved in this buyback, which could cost up to $1 billion on taxpayers' expenses. It doesn't matter, look, they say they're going to drop it from 6 guns to 4 guns. You can only buy 1 gun at a time. What they're not taking into consideration, which is upsetting a lot of gun owners, is that these are relics that are handed down from granddads or great-granddads, and they have it as collectors. That means they're going to have to lose their guns, and that's what's upsetting a lot of the gun owners. It's not the law-abiding Australians that's been affected here. That is going to be affected here. I think the Prime Minister has defected from the real problem that we have and what needs to be investigated. It's not about the gun laws. Yes, I'd investigate. They failed in stopping this fellow who was under radicalisation, and he was actually had a terror watch on him. He should never have been allowed to be in a house with his father who had guns. The government failed themselves, not the legal gun owners.
Your population is increasing quite a lot, Senator. We've got a national survey that was published in the Daily Telegraph on the weekend from Fox and Hedgehog, provided exclusively to News Corp. It revealed that 2 million new supporters have come to you since the federal election, and support for One Nation has tripled by 21%. Why do you think that is?
It's called common sense policies and how to deal with issues in Australia, and I believe that the Australian people have had enough of the major political parties. They're really feeling it tough out there, and especially the Bondi massacre was the nail in the coffin for a lot of Australians. They felt it simmering away. The anti-Semitism that was not addressed by governments, especially the federal government, to address that issue, and they want some change in this nation. A lot of people are very proud of Australians, but we've been told to suppress that pride in our nation, to fly the flag and who we are as Australians, our culture, our identity, our cost of living, our way of life has been stripped from us. And it's Australians to say no. I'm a very proud, patriotic Australian. I want what's right for all Australians. And I put out policies to actually address this, and Australians are levitating to it. And I thank the Australian people for their support, and it's actually coming through in our support. People wanting to be a candidate, stand up and fight for the country, and I think it's wonderful.
The Prime Minister announced Kevin Rudd's going to end his time as Australia's ambassador to the US at the end of March. That's a year earlier than expected. What's your reaction to that?
Look, I think at that meeting that they had at the White House last October was quite evident that the President gave Kevin Rudd a slap in the face. And I think that possibly over the last couple of months, has he had many invitations to the White House, it was quite evident that the President doesn't particularly like Kevin Rudd. So I'd say that Albanese's made the decision we need to get him out of there, because we need to have a working relationship with the US, and that's really up to the ambassador. And I don't believe that Kevin Rudd is the right person for that job. So it'd be interesting to see who Albanese replaces him with.
Who would you like him to replace him with?
Look, I've always held Brendan Nelson or Peter Cosgrove in high regards. I think Brendan Nelson would make an excellent US ambassador.
All right, Senator, before we let you go, there is another poll out today, and it's revealing young people are leading the charge against the big corporation stance on Australia Day. We know you would love to talk about this one, but do we need to have a holiday on Australia Day? What's your take on that?
Leave it the way it is. And you know what? The young ones, I'm surprised by this. I think it's wonderful when you got, 72% of the young ones saying no, their corporation should not be changed today or giving them another day off in lieu of it, and 53% say no, it stays as Australia Day. That's fantastic to hear. Music to my ears. People, Australia Day is Australia Day. Be proud of who you are and accept that day. This debate goes on every year. I don't know why. I wish people would just accept it, get over it, move on and enjoy and celebrate as all Australians should.
And